This lesson is for Monday, lesson 123, and we're doing page 244 in the 5th edition book, page 182 in the 4th edition book. Exercises D and E are assigned for today. Exercise D wants us to find different types of phrases. It's called distinguishing phrases. It wants us to distinguish them or tell them apart one from another. So, to do that, let's understand what types of phrases we have to choose from. First of all, of course, is the prepositional phrase. We're familiar with those. And then the other three choices are phrases called verbal phrases. First, let's look at the prepositional phrase. I have listed two. The first one is for lunch. The second one, with several close friends. I put two because I want you to see that like in for lunch, we have the preposition for, and right after it we have its object, the object of the preposition lunch. You can have that kind of prepositional phrase where you just have the preposition and its object and no modifiers, or you can have modifiers in between, like with is a preposition and the object of the preposition, the noun, doesn't come till all the way at the end of the phrase. It answers the question with what, because it's a noun, right? With friends. And then it has a couple adjectives in between telling what kind of friends. That's fine. Those are prepositional phrases. They always begin with a preposition and they always end with a noun, which answers the question what about the preposition. For what? For lunch. With what or with who? With friends. Any noun question, who, what, Prepositional phrases. We're familiar with those. The other three are called verbal phrases. And if you remember, a verbal is a verb form used as a different part of speech in a sentence. And we have three different verbals: participles, infinitives, and gerunds. So for phrases, a participial phrase is going to be used as a different part of speech in a sentence, not a verb. An infinitive phrase, it's going to start with an infinitive and be used as a different part of speech in the sentence. And a gerund phrase will start with a gerund but be used as a different part of speech in the sentence other than a verb. Let's look at the first one. Well, first I want to show you a chart. Look at this slide here. And it would be good if you actually wrote this down. Paused the video, got out a piece of paper, and wrote this down. Participles. They're used as adjectives. Gerunds. They're going to be used as nouns. Infinitives are going to be used as either a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. Always. Participles. A participle ends in ing or it ends in d, ed, t, or en. And I'll explain that in a minute. Gerunds are always going to end in ing, and infinitives are always going to be a verb with the word to before it. So back to participles. Why are participles always going to end in ing or d, ed, t, or en? Well, because they are, as their name suggests, participles. And if you think back to when we learned about principal parts of verbs, we learned that there were 4 principal parts, and 2 of those parts were called participles. There was a present participle type of verb, form of the verb, and a past participle form. And if you notice about the present participle forms, they all end in ing. And the past participle forms, they end in either just a d, an ed, sometimes a t, and sometimes en, because of our irregular verbs. But this is what they're talking about when they say participle. They mean either the is, like for example, the verb move, is moving, is the present participle form, and have moved is the past participle form. Because we would say, in the past, I moved the box, or I have moved the box. That's the past participle form. But it's not always ed, sometimes it's t, like built, have built, or en, have eaten. So those are the verbs we're looking for in participial phrases. So with that information in mind, reading the part about participles again, hopefully it'll make more sense. Present participles end in ing. Past participles often end in d, ed, t, or en. And in a participial phrase, in any phrase, in a participial phrase, the participle is going to be the first word of the phrase. In a gerund phrase, the gerund is going to be the first word of the phrase. In an infinitive phrase, the infinitive is going to be the first word. It'll be two words because it'll be to and then the verb. But that'll be at the very beginning of the phrase. Same thing with prepositional phrases. The preposition is always the very first word in the phrase. So if you're trying to find a participial phrase, you're going to look for a verb form ending in ing or one of those past participle endings. Now look at the gerund definition. A gerund is a verbal used as a noun. Gerunds end in ing. Well, this could be confusing. If present participles end in ing and gerunds end in ing, how am I supposed to know which one I'm dealing with? Well, by what job it's doing in the sentence. As you can see, participles do adjective jobs and gerunds do noun jobs. So we will look at what questions it's answering and about which word, and then we'll know which one it is. And lastly, the infinitive, those can be used as nouns, adjectives, or adverbs, and you will find them by looking for the word to with a verb following it. So let's look at the first sentence in exercise D. Number 1. The kitten, soaked to the skin, was a pitiful sight to see. And our directions want us to find phrases of the 4 types we talked about, and then distinguish which type we're dealing with. So the first thing I see here is the word to with a verb after it, to see. So that very clearly is an infinitive phrase. And now phrases, they can have more words other than just the infinitive, or like in this case, they can just be to and the verb. So this, I would underline it in the book, and then maybe right on top of it I would write INF period to mark it as an infinitive phrase. And actually, if you don't mind my jumping around a bit, before I go to the exercises in the book, I want to bring you back to the board where I had written some sample sentences for each type of phrase, so I can show you exactly what we're looking for before we start to find them in the sentences in the book. So we talked about the prepositional phrase. Now what about the participial phrase? We said present participles end in ing, past participles end in d, ed, t, or en, and then we also said that these verb forms, these participles, were going to be the first word in the phrase. So the first one I have is studying her notes. It ends in ing, it's a verb form, studying her notes. That's a participial phrase. It could be a gerund phrase, we don't know. We have to decide what job it's doing in the sentence. Well, if it's doing an adjective job, it's participial. So to be doing an adjective job, we'd have to be answering the question, which one or what kind? So say we picked a person, like Mary, and then we asked, which Mary? And we said that it was the Mary who was studying her notes. That's what you want. So if the sentence were as such, Mary, studying her notes, sat quietly in the library. We would be using studying her notes as an adjective, because we'd be saying, which Mary? The one who's studying her notes. It would be a gerund phrase if I used it as a noun. If I used the whole phrase as the subject of my sentence, I would be using the whole phrase as a noun. Maybe I said studying her notes was the best thing she could have been doing right then. Then the whole phrase studying her notes is answering the question, who or what was the best thing? Studying her notes was. So then that whole phrase would be the subject of the sentence, and it would be a noun, and then it would be a gerund phrase. Does that make sense? Yes, no? Okay. Well, let's look at the second participial phrase. Meant for good. Meant is a past participle verb form, so the phrase meant for good could be a participial phrase if it's doing an adjective job in a sentence. So maybe if his actions were meant for good, then I'd be using it as an adjective. What kind of actions? Which actions? The ones meant for good. And then the infinitive phrase starts with to and a verb, to buy, and the phrase includes all the words that go with it, to buy groceries. And infinitives are tricky because they can be adjectives, adverbs, or nouns, but luckily you don't have to figure out what job they're doing in the sentence in exercise D. You just have to label what type of phrase they are. And if it starts with to buy, it's an infinitive phrase. And then the gerund phrase, jogging through the park. Again, notice how jogging is an ing form of a verb, but it's in the gerund category because if I were using it as a noun in a sentence. Again, suppose I were using jogging through the park as the subject of my sentence. Jogging through the park is good exercise. That's what makes it a gerund, using it as a noun. Now let's go back to the book and do a couple of the sample sentences. Okay, so we did this one, to see. And then sentence number 1 has a participial phrase, soaked to the skin, because see how soaked ends in ed? Soaked to the skin. That is a participial phrase. Sentence number 2, eating a balanced diet demands the willpower to resist excessive sweets and fats. Do you see two phrases? The first one I see is eating a balanced diet. I see a phrase that begins with a verb form ending in ing. So I have two choices. I have to decide if it's being used as an adjective or a noun. And I've determined that it's being used as a noun because it's being the subject of the sentence. As you can see from the diagram, the verb is demands. And if I ask who or what demands, the answer is eating a balanced diet demands. The whole phrase is the subject of the sentence. That means it's being used as a noun. That means it is a gerund phrase. The second one I see in number 2 is to resist excessive sweets and fats. And we can clearly see this is an infinitive phrase because it begins with to resist. And then keep the words with it that go with it. To resist excessive sweets and fats. Number 3. Eyeing the horizon, the old sailor perched in the crow's nest to search for approaching ships. Eyeing the horizon, a verb form that ends in ing. Is it being a participial phrase or a gerund phrase? Well, what job is it doing in the sentence? Is it being the subject or a noun in any way? Let's see. Let's find the subject and verb of the sentence. Sailor perched. That's the subject and verb. So I don't think it's not being the subject, that's for sure. What question is it answering and about what word? It's talking about sailor and it's telling us which one, what kind of sailor. The one eyeing the horizon. So it's answering an adjective question about sailor. That means it's doing an adjective job, so it's a participial phrase. And then finally I see an infinitive phrase, to search for approaching ships. And I know it's infinitive because it begins with to and a verb.